You're listening to newstreamingnetwork.com, home of goingsolomedia.com and WGSN-DB Going Solo Network radio, podcasts, and TV. Welcome to the Divorce Coalition Live, a show designed for divorce professionals to enhance the divorce process to prevent re-traumatization of domestic abuse survivors. I'm your host, Jill Kaufman. I'm a therapist, a divorce coach, and a co-parenting expert. You can get in touch with me at info@divorcecoachjill or divorcecoachjill.com. The Divorce Coalition is a nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing awareness and education of divorce professionals and process change to create a more supportive and less traumatic divorce experience. We have united top podcast hosts and divorce professionals to create systematic change in the divorce process for domestic abuse victims. With 23.5% of divorces citing domestic violence as a cause, we bring you expert guests, practical advice, and enlightening conversations. Knowledge is power in creating change in the world of divorce when it comes to domestic abuse. So without further ado, let's get started. Coercive control abusers and domestic violence perpetrators can weaponize the family court system by using the court to have lengthy financial and custody litigation. But family law and other divorce professionals can play a critical role in identifying and helping these victims. Today, I'm asking my guest, Courtney Gilmartin, to share her expertise to help professionals identify abuse tactics used in family court proceedings. Courtney Gilmartin is a protective mom of two and domestic abuse survivor. She's the CEO of Monarch Consulting Group and provides one-to-one strategic guidance and support for protective moms who are dealing with family court litigation and custody issues. She's the founder of New Jersey Protective Moms, a grassroots nonprofit dedicated to improving the family law system in New Jersey through advocacy, education, and awareness. Recently, she became active in her efforts relating to legislative reform, including the groundbreaking coercive control legislation that was passed and signed into New Jersey law in January of 2024. Welcome, Courtney.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm excited to interview you today. Did I miss anything else? Can you tell us a little bit more about you?
So, just a little bit about my experience with family court. I got separated in 2016, divorced in 2017. I think what's interesting about my journey is my divorce, relatively speaking, was pretty quick. It was only a year. That was definitely strategic on my part. I wanted to get in and out as quick as I could, just because I knew the longer we were in litigation, the more expensive it would be, and probably the more things that would get thrown in that weren't favorable for me in the end. So we got in and out pretty quick, but then since 2017, we've been in post-settlement litigation, which is, how I came to be sitting here talking with you and gained all this experience that I have, because I think there's not a tremendous amount of, information out there for that. A lot of it is focused on like the active divorce litigation. So that's why I like to talk about post-settlement and also how the abuser will weaponize the divorce process and after against their victim.
Absolutely. Can you just explain what you use protective moms a lot? Can you just explain what that term means?
So for me, protective moms is, it's a term that I feel like is thrown around a lot, but it's also something that I think is a little bit misunderstood. So for me, it's, I was in an abusive marriage, I got divorced, and then I am trying my best to protect my children from my ex-husband's abuse and the actions and the things he was doing after we got separated to the children. And when I was going to either, the parenting coordinator or the court or my attorney, saying these are things I'm worried about, it was, there was a lot of diminishing my experiences, trying to, I don't want to use the word gaslight because I feel like that's everywhere, but almost gaslighting me into just like, he'll get over it. Just wait a year, do this. So it's almost like a tightrope that protective moms have to walk, because you don't want to, they'll use alienation to counter your concerns. A lot of people get labeled Munchausen by proxy for saying things about the kids or raising their concerns. So it's really just, always acting in the best interest of the children, trying to protect your children from that abuser's behavior and the post separation abuse that goes on. I really, kind of lean into the term because I feel like there's a lot of shame that protective moms feel and confusion, and just it's very isolating because you feel like you're not believed. So, we created New Jersey Protective Moms, the co-founder and I, and we really wanted to lean into that term to give moms, the foundation that they need and the reassurance and the voice. And it's helped empower a lot of protective moms that we've come across that are trying to protect their kids from abuse while navigating the family court system.
Right. I get that. So what are the biggest misconceptions protective moms have about family law?
So I think, first of all, people think, all right, I'm going to go into family court. I'm going to say, my ex is abusive or my ex is doing XYZ, and that the kids are going to be protected and I'm going to be protected. And that's sadly not always the case. And I think also just the level of protection that people think they will get is also a misunderstanding, right? Like when you have children, unfortunately, that is going to be a tie that you have forever with your abusive ex. So it's kind of like the conduit between you guys. There's always going to be that connection. So you need to really take a step back and do some research. I always tell moms, an informed litigant is a strong litigant, because then you'll know what you're up against, right? So yes, family court can be extremely emotionally draining and financially draining, but there's also people within the system that can help you to a certain degree, but you have to really be grounded in your expectations. For example, with a PC, they're not probably going to sit there and, tell your ex to stop doing this behavior. You might get a good one that will, but if your ex is disparaging you and going off on a rant in a session, they may likely do that. So you have to just stay focused on, okay, what can I use this person for? What is my end goal? And really ground yourself in those expectations. If you don't, you're just going to be continuously disappointed. And I think always have a really good therapist that you can process anything, whether it's a hearing or emotion or even just, constant litigation, letters from your ex's attorney, or anything that you need to process, meetings with PCs, meeting with evaluators. Have that therapist so you can reserve, your emotional unloading onto your therapist and not your lawyer, because those are billable hours and they definitely add up.
Absolutely. I'm so in alignment with you on that point, because so many people go to attorneys and they're not mental health professionals. As a mental health professional, I'm like, you're going to the wrong professional and you're paying a lot of money. So it doesn't make sense. So yeah. And when somebody's using a parenting coordinator, they're expecting them to stick up for them. And so as divorce professionals, how can we help the survivor understand expectations, I guess, is what I'm worried about.
Yeah. So it's twofold, right? Like, I think, like I said, knowledge is truly power. So in my journey, I've been involved in various professionals, a GAL, co-parenting therapists, my own therapist, parenting coordinators, and then forensic evaluator. So there are rules of the court, and their role is defined by the court. And there's guidelines that you can find and you can read up on, based on, okay, I have a parenting coordinator. Here are the rules of the court. I hear a lot of people saying, that they don't act within the bounds or within their role. And that may or may not be true. I can't comment on someone's case specifically, but if you really read it, understand it, if you have questions about that stuff, that's what you should ask your attorney. Like, hey, I read the rules of their role, here's my question, XYZ, whatever it is. That's a good question for your attorney, right? So you really understand what you're getting yourself into. I've been very forthcoming with my parenting coordinators and said, like, I'm fine with a joint session at first, but if it gets into the blaming, shaming, disparaging language, demeaning, like, we're going to have to figure out a better way. I would prefer like separate sessions. Try to work with the person to a degree and just be transparent in voicing your concerns. I've had to have joint sessions, unfortunately, with my ex in a lot of settings, and they just don't work. So then I always, will just put it on the record, like, I'm fine with a joint session at first, but if it's not beneficial, then we need to figure out something else. And that they'll usually, they'll quickly realize that I was right after the first session, and then kind of honor that request going forward. So I think, again, and I could say this on repeat, just really grounding yourself in those expectations with each individual person, right? Each person will play a very specific role, and you can, use them to your best advantage if you really understand what they're there to do and what they can do.
Yeah, and we're live, so if anybody's watching live and you have a comment, please put your comments into the comment section, and we will be able to respond to them. So, we as divorce professionals need to let our clients know that they're, what expectations are for each role that they have, each of the divorce professionals. And I think letting them know that if it is not a healthy environment for you to be in the same session with, your soon-to-be ex or your ex, you can potentially do separate sessions. That some people might not even know that. And although it's not ideal, you're not going to get as much accomplished. You can do that for a while and maybe try a session together and see how it goes. And if it goes well, you can do it after a while. But each person has to be respectful. And if there's disrespect in the session, and I've seen it many times in I do co-parenting sessions. And it's very hard for the person to stop someone from being disrespectful and abusive. So separate sessions is a really good option, I think.
Yeah. And also, for example, I had 2 PCs throughout my, post-settlement litigation. So it got to a point where, we went for the forensic evaluation, and in talking with her, I shared my concerns, saying, like, look, we've had 2 for a pretty long time. Neither worked. We got no resolution from either of them, right? And you can share, that PCs will normally issue letters or reports or kind of like quarterly updates, whatever their cadence is. And if, in those, they'll normally say, like, we tried to work on XYZ, but nothing's resolved. Or we're, if you're able to have a paper trail, like, we talked to the PC about a passport issue, but we relitigated it 3 times. Like, obviously the PC isn't doing anything to reduce the conflict. You always want to be conflict reducing focused, right? And like, you want to come with an issue or a problem and then have suggestions or want to resolve that issue and move on, right? So if you can prove to the court or an expert that's involved in your case, like, we've utilized these third parties, but they're not reducing conflict, there is a very good chance that you can get an order or a recommendation saying, this service no longer benefits this family. We're not going to do this anymore, which will save you time and money in the long run. Like, now we have, in my case, where a PC is not recommended because it doesn't do anything except fuel the fire and continue the conflict. So that was a huge win, which may sound silly to some people, but it was a win, because I don't need to sit with a PC and constantly re-litigate things that we've talked about since 2016.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's too bad, because it could be a really good tool for some families. What are the biggest roadblocks victims face in family court?
So I think the biggest roadblock is truly just getting to the point where it's not he said, she said, and it's corroborated by a third party, right? So I think that's a huge roadblock. And I think financially, being in family court and having experts weigh in where you're finally at that point is financially a huge undertaking. And most people can't afford it, which is why I started the nonprofit, because my hope one day is that we'll be able to have a fund to help women who need legal representation or forensic evaluations. So, a lot of people have this idea that DC PMP or other state agencies will be able to come in and really make huge sweeping changes in terms of their custody, and that's not always the case. So I think getting to the point where you have a solid foundation and you can kind of build on that and be able to say, okay, here's what we know. This is our family situation. Now we need these services or these professionals to help is definitely the biggest hurdle I've seen, because, these professionals, judges, lawyers, they hear every day, all day, people getting divorced, throwing mud, slinging accusations. So you really have to get out of that. And then trying to separate yourself from the conflict is extremely hard. That's another big roadblock, because when there is conflict, it's very easy to think that both are driving that. And trying to really separate yourself from that is extremely challenging. I mean, I've been working on it for years, and sometimes it's still challenging, right? And I see it with a lot of people that I work with and talk to. Their ex will constantly create conflict, and it's hard to really be able to say, like, okay, here's a string of emails. I'm not part of the problem at all. That's a difficult task for sure. It's an emotional thing. It's hard when you're leaving an abusive relationship and rebuilding, and then you're constantly on the defense, right? Getting attacked from all angles in court motions and paperwork and emails, maybe communication from your ex. It's extremely difficult to try to put your emotions to the side. That's why working with a coach is helpful, and a therapist as well. I say both are equally important, because a therapist can't be on call as much as a coach could be. And sometimes it's daily, incessant communication from the ex that is problematic.
Yeah. And there are different roles for therapists and coaches. So both are very important. So why is legislative reform so important for family court reform?
So this is a hot topic. I get a lot of people on both sides of the fence, if you will. I get a lot of people saying, it's not going to change. But at the end of the day, it's my belief, and it doesn't have to be everybody's, certainly, that if we don't have the legislation to kind of push the change and change the law in New Jersey or whatever state you're working in to change the law, there's nothing that the judges and the family court professionals can leverage, right? So if things stay the same, nothing's going to change. And if you look historically at the laws that are on the books, a lot of them are very old, and even to be progressive, to keep up with the information that we now know and we now understand, coercive control is, right, the foundation of all domestic abuse. And there's a lot of things that we know now that we didn't know, 10, 20, 15 years ago. So we need to make the legislative changes to keep up with the knowledge that we have now, right? And then we need those laws to be able to use to leverage in your case. If you don't have a law in the books that recognizes coercive control as a form of domestic abuse, then you can't go into court and argue, there's coercive control, this is domestic abuse. You might be able to connect the dots with some statutes depending on the way that it's written, but that's kind of a stretch. So it's really the starting point. We need to really change, the society view of domestic violence. We need to change the family court's view of domestic violence, but we really need those laws to start that process. And it's definitely going to be slow. It's not overnight by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's a good starting point for sure, which is why I kind of focus a lot of my energy on that right now.
I have so much more to talk to you about, but now we're going to be taking a short break. Domestic abuse survivors experience a lack of trust in the divorce and legal systems in place to protect them. Research shows that many report re-traumatization in court and reported that legal professionals verbally threatened them, mocked them, did not give them a chance to speak in court, exaggerated the survivor's faults in court, and provoked them to elicit emotional reactions. In other cases, divorce professionals may be the first point of contact for survivors with the ability to help if they recognize the signs. The Divorce Coalition is a nonprofit organization created to change this experience for abuse victims and survivors through education and awareness of divorce professionals. For more information, go to www.divorcecoalition.com, and please support us by making a tax-deductible donation at www.divorcecoalition.com/donate-now. And now back to the show. So what you were talking about with coercive control laws, are they on the books at all? Are they, on in certain states? What's the status of that?
So there's, I believe, 6 states. Massachusetts just passed theirs last week, which was huge. So we have Jersey, Massachusetts, Hawaii, California, There's probably another one that I'm missing there, but I know there's other states that are trying to get it passed too. So depending on how the state's domestic violence statute is set up and, kind of where they fit it in with the legislator will depend on the exact wording. So if you're in another state besides Jersey, definitely want to get a hard copy of the bill and read through it, but I can help anyone in New Jersey for sure. I have the PDF I can send. So in our case, it's not a predicate act in New Jersey, which means you can't go to the police or you can't get a restraining order for coercive control. What our bill did was change the definition of domestic violence, so it now includes coercive control, and we have a whole list in the bill of coercive control behaviors, which is what we really wanted, because we want victims to be able to see in black and white the behaviors that are domestic violence, because most survivors don't even know. They say like 60% of survivors don't know that they're in an abusive relationship. So that was important for us to get in there. One of the things that was really important for us to get in there as well was using court custody or threatening to take custody of the kids is considered coercive control and domestic abuse, which it definitely is. Abusers weaponize that, and they weaponize family court to try to take custody away from their victims all of the time. We see it far, far too often. So it changed the definition of domestic abuse in New Jersey. There's a list of, I believe, 17 acts. So now coercive control is considered one of those. And any history of coercive control has to be taken into consideration by the court when there's a final restraining order hearing. So of course we wanted it to be a predicate act, but we didn't win that battle, but it is important. And again, this is a stretch, but in order to connect the dots, if coercive control is considered now domestic violence in New Jersey, and someone is litigating for custody, and a history of domestic violence is one of the factors, the 16 factors of child custody considerations that the court has to take into consideration. You can say if there's a history of coercive control and you get an expert that understands coercive control that says that, you could say, obviously there's a history of coercive control that's not in the child's best interest, and it should be considered in child custody.
Wow.
That is how the law can be used today. We're hoping with Caden's law that we're working on in New Jersey that we're able to get a much more stronger worded language in there regarding child custody and domestic abuse and coercive control, but more to come on that. So, but hopefully that helps some people. And if you're in another state, I'm happy to look at your coercive control law if there's one in your state, and try to help you figure out if you can use it in your litigation for sure. That's what I help a lot of people with, try to understand, because it's a lot for someone that hasn't been in this world, and it's also a lot for anyone that even understands it and is going through a divorce with an abuser, because you're in a compromised emotional state. So it's hard to process and understand and connect the dots and figure out your strategy, because your strategy is just surviving and trying to get through this.
That is such good information. Thank you for providing that. What is some helpful advice that you can give protective moms and victims?
So I think first and foremost, it's, there's no rule book. There's no rules to this, right? If you need to take a step back from litigation or anything, take a pause and take care of yourself. If you need a break, take a break. If you need to wait a year to do that best interest eval, wait a year. I waited 5 years to do mine. And it was because there was so much going on after the divorce. The kids were super young, and, it's your life, it's your journey. So you get to dictate the time there, right? And your lawyer can guide you and definitely give you, the advice, but at the end of the day, it's your life. They're not living it. So take their advice, take it into consideration, weigh all your options, and do what is best for you and your family and your children. And, it's a war, not a battle. That is so true. It takes a really long time. It's not fast at all. Family court is extremely slow moving, and you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. But at the end of the day, if you just stay the course, strategy is so important. That's what I work with a lot of people on, is just their holistic strategy, and I think if you have a strategy and you can really kind of follow it, obviously there's going to be changes because things change, but that really helps keep you grounded. What I keep saying is like grounded in your expectations, grounded in next steps. And the strategy is important because then you're not reactive, you're more proactive. You're going to say like, okay, this is what I ultimately want, but here's all the steps, and here, I have a hearing for whatever it is. Here's like the 3 scenarios. Here's best case scenario I want. Here's what I think is probably going to happen. Here's worst case scenario. And then what am I going to do after that? Right. So long-term strategy is huge. Like you have your kids for the rest of their lives. This seems, it's overwhelming, but at the end of the day, if you want, sole custody or sole decision making, that's probably going to take a little while, but you have your kids for the rest of their lives. So you'll be able to enjoy the benefits of your hard work, for years and years to come, right? It's not just this minute period when the kids are young and things seem so overwhelming and so frustrating. That's what I always try to say to people. And also, if you can get divorced, and even if you have to settle on 50-50, which I hate for most cases when there's abuse, but at least you are able to give your kids a peaceful, calm, happy house that you want to run for 50% of the time. Because even if you're in that house and the kids aren't seeing the fighting, they know, right? You can feel that. The kids know. So I always say focus on that, lean into the 50%, try to take vacations if you can, try to take the extra time, the holidays, whatever time you have worked into your parenting plan. And then, hopefully, with time and the right strategy, you can limit the other parent's time if there's issues. And in the end, everything will work out, which I hate when, I'm not dismissing anyone's experience by saying that, but it truly, truly does. It's just sometimes the in-between is really, really frustrating and emotionally draining.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important for divorce professionals to remember not to put pressure on the domestic violence survivors, because what you're saying about, if you can't deal with it right now, you can wait and you can slow it down. That's a really good option for people to talk to their clients and about. And you just want to put yourself in the situation of the victim, of the survivor, and really understand that this is an extremely difficult situation that they're in, and they need to do it the way that works for them. So how does family court, and I think we know some of the ways, but how does family court re-victimize victims?
So many ways. So just starting from the most basic, right? You're now a plaintiff and a defendant. So you're just adversarial right from the start. So you are being pitted against one another. And I think for me, one of the biggest problems that I've seen are a lot of the attorneys. They just love to, it's like gasoline on a fire. They just pour it on. And then constantly having to tell your story over and over and over again is re-victimizing. And then, in motions or certifications or hearings, a lot of abusers take that as like a stand where they can get up on stage and they can, disparage you and rehash things all over again. And then there's a lot of the like gaslighting, and the onus is always on the victim, right? So it's like, well, he's just mad because XYZ. What if you tried this? Or he's just upset because, you didn't tell him 5 days in advance. You told him 3 days in advance. So why don't you try to tell him 3 days in advance? And then you tell him 5 days in advance. Well, he's just upset you didn't tell him 7 days in advance. Why don't you try 7? So it's like the bar is constantly moving, and the victim is always managing the abuser's behavior, which is extremely frustrating. And also just, when you get divorced, you think, or separated, like, okay, now I don't have to live and deal with this every day, but you have the onslaught of the texts or the emails or the lawyers. So it's definitely really, really tough. It's emotionally draining some days. And that's why I said, you need to take a pause. Don't check your emails if you don't have to. If there's not something pressing, don't. If you don't want to read another message, turn off the notifications in our family wizard for 12 hours. Do it, at the end of the day or in the morning when it's not going to really mentally drain you or trigger you, right? If you have someone that you can trust that can read them for you, or if you meet with your therapist regularly and that's when you read the messages, do that. Do whatever you can, even small things like what I'm saying, to try to protect your peace in the interim. And like you said, for lawyers and anyone else, it's important not to pressure the clients. And that's why, again, strategy is important. If you can write it out and have a spreadsheet, or, you know, I'm a program manager by trade, project manager. So I have like basically a project plan, which is my strategy. And if I'm like, okay, no, I still want to do that, but this is just not the time. I'm really struggling. I need a break, whatever. Just, you can say that to your attorney. Like, what if we waited 6 weeks? What if we waited 6 months? What if we waited a month? There's nothing wrong with saying those things. And you'll actually be more efficient because you'll, have like I said, the strategy, the long-term strategy, and you can kind of map it out with your attorney and figure out next steps that work for you, because you'll have a much better result if you go into a forensic evaluation or any type of evaluation when you're in the mental place to be able to handle and process that, because it is a really, really heavy thing to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you say there are divorce attorneys, like this, and there are divorce attorneys who just love a fight and will do anything for that. But then there are other divorce attorneys who are really good about that and who understand the client, like what we're talking about. And that's what we're trying to do with the show, is to educate and to really get people to understand how different it is when you're working with someone who's who's a victim and who has this re-traumatization. And I think anybody going through divorce is somewhat traumatized, but it's even more so when you have a history of abuse. And so for professionals to really get this, and especially divorce attorneys, that would be amazing for the clients. So that's I really appreciate your sharing all of this. Do you have anything else that you'd like to share?
Geez, I feel like there's so much. I think for professionals, for me, the biggest thing is, abusers and domestic violence perpetrators are manipulative and charming by nature, right? That's their personality. A lot of them have personality disorders. So that's not going away. And that's not just a siloed behavior to their victim. So that's how they are in life. That's how they are in work, probably out in society. It's how they're also going to be to their attorney. So some attorneys may truly not realize until it's too late that they're dealing with someone like this, right? So if that is the case, and there is someone that is constantly relitigating or bringing up things that have been settled, I think that's where family law attorneys can really kind of step in and try their best to really say to the client, like, we can't continue to relitigate this. We've settled this. We need to move on. Of course, there's billable hours, but at the end of the day, that strategy could also backfire on you, because if you constantly relitigate the same thing and finally, it's proven that they're acting in bad faith by just driving up legal fees, it could be ordered that they have to pay the other person's legal fees. So I would be cognizant of that. And the onslaught of personal attacks by the attorney is just as traumatizing as the onslaught of personal attacks from the abuser. So if you see someone that's really disparaging or demeaning or degrading to the other party, there's a difference between raising concerns about parenting, or if something happened, like, I'm concerned about, and then there's the other difference of, like, you're a horrible person, you're this, you're that. So if you get into the weeds with that, I really hope that attorneys will kind of take a step back and think about what they're doing, because they could really be re-traumatizing a victim that has PTSD, CPTSD, or is trying to heal from some sort of domestic abuse. And it's so damaging. So, on a human level, like, I want attorneys to really stop, because I have seen horrible written correspondence from attorneys just slamming victims, and it's awful.
Yeah.
It's just awful. I hope one day family court really gets away from that, because it's the mudslinging is truly awful, and it just takes away the focus, which should be on the kids and the safety of the kids.
And respectful communication, right?
Yes.
Courtney, thank you so, so much for being my guest today. This was really incredible in terms of how much information that you shared, and I think it's going to really help a lot of people. Um, to my audience, thank you for being with Courtney and myself on this episode of the Divorce Coalition Live. If you would like to listen to this episode again, you can find the link at www.divorcecoalition.com live show tab. All of Courtney's information will be available in the show notes. And we have a special gift for you, a free ebook called Stop Condoning Domestic Violence. And the address it's at is www.divorcecoalition.com/stop-condoning-ebook. I so enjoyed being your host. I'm Jill Kaufman again, and you can get in touch with me at divorcecoachjill.com. You can find the Divorce Coalition at divorcecoalition.com. Please like and share our Instagram page at Divorce Coalition page. Join us in the fight to change an abuse survivor's divorce journey. Stay tuned next Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern for another episode of the Divorce Coalition Live. Until next time, help us spread the word that divorce needs to change to create a more supportive and less traumatic divorce experience.